get right down to it. Today's resolutional analysis is on concealed weapons permits, and it is concealed weapons permits do more harm than good. Um, I'd like to. I believe the resolutional analysis is that this is a value debate due to the use of the word than in a comparison. I like to define concealed weapons as weapons of which are concealed, and I believe that's all that would need defining. Now, on to my first or second observation. Vigilantism is on the rise, 80% more from one year to the next. Now, this is a serious problem when it comes down to concealed weapons. Would you really want your life in the hands of a stranger, especially a stranger who could have unknown prejudices, discrimination against you as a person? That scared me. Or, yes?
So, when you talk about this vigilantism, do these vigilantes, do they all have concealed carry permits?
Yes, I'll get to that specific example towards the end of this. Continuing on, yes, they can have personal judgment, discrimination towards you or people whom they believe you to represent, and your life is essentially placed into their hands. And with vigilantism rising, that is an increasingly concerning thing. Vigilantism with that concealed weapons permits can also increase dangerous levels of confidence, which can lead to even more vigilantism. It's basically a snowball, which also shows how much it does more harm than good because of the snowballing effect it gives. Now, one example of this would be George Zimmerman. He was a vigilante, and he did indeed have a concealed carry permit, and I believe this is a good representation of a lot of the people who are vigilantes. He had a permit, and as you all know the case, he took what he considered to be justice into his own hands and shot an unarmed black teenager. Now imagine that, but if more of the world also had access to those weapons and could execute their judgment like this as well. That would, yes.
Okay, so George Zimmerman is one example, but what percentage of vigilantes are registered as concealed weapon permits?
I don't believe that's, we were able to find that in the reduced prep time, but it would be reasonable to assume that they do have the permits, as you would have to purchase a gun. And I doubt that with 8% of vigilantism on the rise year to year, that 100% of them go to the black market for things like that. Ultimately, the guns that are used in vigilantism are registered, and in order to achieve those guns, you have to go through a gun shop that requires permit. Continuing on, the ultimate impact of this is there is less safety when people have concealed weapons permits. In fact, the ultimate value of this debate is simply on the subject of safety, and you can see why vigilante then is such a strong point in this, because it reduces safety, just like how concealed weapons permits reduce safety as well. Now, my third observation is accidental discharge. This is something that happens when you have a gun. It's pretty self-explanatory in that the gun, on accident or through negligence, goes off. Now, there is statistics providing this. There were 15 cases of accidental discharge in 2011 and 21 in 2010. Now, I want you to realize that both of these statistics were strictly with police officers, people who are trained in handling weapons, people who have gone through years of having these weapons, in that they too have accidental discharges. In fact, one officer fired off his own finger with it, and he was on the force for years before that. And even here, the statistics themselves are misreported and could be much higher because many police officers don't tend to report this for fear of getting fired like the aforementioned man did. So you can understand that it would be even more with civilians who didn't go through rigorous training or are subject to rigorous background checks on specific negligence. Yes.
Would you say that it would be a higher rate for police charges because they're using guns on a daily basis, multiple times a day?
I don't believe so, as many of these discharges were not while they were on the job, and additionally, contact with guns. As much as I could see your point that it would increase statistics, I ultimately don't believe that that is a very large factor, as guns themselves are bound to discharge despite what you are doing with them, which is why it's called accidental discharge. Continuing on, now the ultimate impact of, previously continuing with my subpoint A of this, with civilians having even more accidental discharge. As I said, they don't go through the same vigorous training, and with even more guns and even more permits being granted, accidental discharge rates will continue to rise. And now you see this isn't exactly about the permits themselves, but that guns, when given through the permits, are what's dangerous. So that links into more people dying from accidental discharges or getting seriously hurt, or like the officer did, losing a finger. Now, this ties into a quote from a very highly decorated shooter teacher. That's not the correct name for the profession, I believe, but a teacher of whom teaches marksmen. Yeah, training instructor for marksmen. And he said there are two types of marksmen: those who have had an accidental discharge and those who will. Thank you for listening here today. I'd just like to tell you, vote Gov. Sorry if I stuttered. I'm getting like really cold.
Gotta keep warm.
Take a little water.
Okay. Roadmap, I'm going to go off case. Let's see. 3 off case, and then case. When Kevin McLaughlin entered the Dollar General in Orrville, Alabama, he probably didn't expect that that would be the last place he would ever remember being. A man with a gun herded tens of individuals into the break room of the Dollar General store and held them hostage. But Kevin McLaughlin had his concealed carry permit, and he knew that when the timing was right, he had to strike. He saved at least 10 people from being held hostage by a gunman. So we want to talk about how the concealed carry permit itself, A, makes sure the people using it are well trained and have the qualifications, but B, how it can, when it comes down to life and death, a concealed carry permit will save your life. First, our first observation is this is going to be a value contention, so you can go to their resolutional analysis, move down to, I believe their criterion ended up being, they just said safety, but that came out later. I'm going to think that that's their criterion. So my counter definition is that we should be talking about the safety of innocent people, not just everybody. The violation is that theirs is the safety of everybody, so like even a criminal or like a mass murderer, they're saying essentially like we should be worried about their safety, and if a concealed carry permit hurts their safety, then it's bad, and so I think that's a violation. The standards here basically are first, bright line. We need to know like whose safety are we protecting. They're not explicit and they're vague, but the second one is education. We should be focusing on like the distinct difference between killing someone who is guilty or threatening someone and someone who is innocent. So, bright line and education. The standards first are a priori. You need only know whether their case is topical in order to vote. You need to only know like whether their value is debatable or not. And basically, we're saying that it doesn't give it grounds for the best debate. We say ours is better for education. So the point where they say they skew the debate to make us have to talk about like, oh, well, now let's try to protect like murderers and people like that, we shouldn't have to do that.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I can't stand up.
Sorry.
At what point did we suggest that safety would include the safety of mass murderers?
Well, you just said that the criterion was safety, and then didn't expand on it from there. So, like, basically, if you're going to come up here and then say it's that you're not worried about those people's safety, I think that could be a possible shifting burdens argument. But I'm not going to get to that. I just think that you should be more explicit with your values. So our counter definition should be the safety of innocent people. So now, let's get to our second observation, which is background. And Judge, you don't have to flow this if you don't want to, but I think that these are going to be important in the rebuttals. First, let's talk about how to get a concealed carry permit. First of all, it's a lot more stringent than simply being a registered gun owner. First, there has to be a comprehensive background check. Second, there is gun training that you have to go to that is specific to getting a concealed carry. Next, there's a waiting period. Fourth, there is a psychological evaluation. And finally, they have to demonstrate a good cause for needing a concealed carry weapon. So they can't just say, I think it'd be cool. They have to literally demonstrate that someone is threatening their life. So the example here is the story of James Davidson, who's abusing his wife, Catherine Ford. I'll get to it after the story, after their separation. And James Davidson continued to ignore court orders and restraining orders, but was still not arrested. So finally, on the night that he decides to shoot his wife, Catherine Ford, 3 times, Catherine had already called the police. She had already gone to a neighbor's door and tried to escape, but there was no alternative. And she ended up being shot 3 times. Miraculously, she survived. But the point is that if she had a concealed carry permit, she wouldn't have to be paralyzed for life as a result of being shot 3 times. And in the time that it took her to run to a neighbor's house or call the police, she could have saved her own, she could have worried about her own safety because she's innocent. And that's what we're saying we should champion. So now let's get to observation 3, entitled Less Crime. So basically, we know that crime is bad, but specifically violent crime. Those crimes where somebody has a weapon against you, and if you do not have a weapon, then you are helpless against them. The B point is that according to the Washington Post in an article published last year, there are now 41 states that have concealed carry permits, and more are beginning to adopt this legislation. And the reason, according to the article, is that because in the states that have more concealed carry laws, and that allow for it, there are lower crime rates. For example, 20% lower rates of burglary and 26% lower rates of vehicle theft. And in Illinois, for example, homicide is down 52%. So we can see that there's a clear correlation between states adopting concealed carry legislation and crime going down. So the B point is that concealed carry permits basically are decreasing crime, yeah, so when we get to, like, and that's what our advocacy is saying, that's why concealed carry permits do more good. So at the point that we reduce crime, specifically violent crime, we have those warrants about, like, 20 to 52%. We're not talking about something minuscule like 3 or 2%. So it really does reduce crime. Now let's talk about self-defense. So let's look at response times of local law enforcement. The average response time for 911 right now is 11 minutes. 11 minutes is enough time for somebody to commit whatever violent act they have in their head upon you if you do not have a weapon to defend yourself. So 911 does not stop attackers. And specifically in Detroit, there was a city where the average response time was 50 minutes. 50 minutes in an area like Detroit, which is a lot more subject to higher crime rates. So we can't rely on the argument that, oh, well, 911 will help. So police are not able to stop this. So if police can't stop it, how are we going to protect ourselves? And we think that it's concealed carry permits. Yes.
You said that it takes 11 minutes of response time. Is that to the public, or is this people in their own homes?
Oh, that's like when you call 911, that's a police getting to your home in 11 minutes. So you call 911.
So this is to police getting to people's homes. Because 11 minutes?
Just the average of all calls that were sent to the 911 call center takes them 11 minutes to respond to. I don't know about you, Judge, but if someone is in my house with a weapon or is being violent against me, I don't want to have to wait 11 minutes for somebody to come help me. I want to be able to help myself. We're about helping individuals protect themselves and about decreasing crime overall. So our C point on observation 4 of self-defense is that concealed carry permits allow for the best self-defense. So look at our two warrants of Kevin McLaughlin, who saved multiple people in the Dollar General store, and also of Catherine Ford, who, like, if she would have had a concealed carry permit, she would have been able to protect herself. Now let's get to Case. Turn their safety argument, because we make a lot of arguments about, like, cross-plat, how we're actually solving for safety more. When they said that vigilantism is on the rise, exactly, that's why we need more people with concealed carry permits in order to protect themselves from these vigilantes who are not concealed carry permits by and large, but are simply just gun owners, if that. Accidental discharge, there were no casualties as a result of accidental discharges that they brought up, so we think that we solve better for crime and safety. That's why you're going to be voting for the neg today.
I don't want to wait 50 minutes to shoot somebody. I want to shoot now.
I want my shooting and I want it now.
Did Matt have to leave?
No, he's
Up
watching-
there.
he's upstairs
watching the other
Right
video.
now.
Okay.
All right, I'd like to thank our judge and our opponents for giving us this argument, our judge for being here to make sure this is going to be a fair debate. I'm going to start with the off case first for my opponents. They said Kevin McLaughlin had a concealed weapon. He said 10 people. And they argued that we are arguing the safety of innocent people. Well, if Kevin McLaughlin were to accidentally try to shoot the criminal, but he accidentally hits an innocent person, or the bullet ricochets and hits him innocently, isn't that putting the safety of innocent people in danger by having a concealed weapon? The next one they can say is that a woman was shot by her husband in her own home. In her own home, you do not need a concealed weapon permit. This is for walking outside. She could have easily defended her husband with pepper spray or any other weapon that does not need a concealed weapon permit. She could have easily defended herself with a baseball bat with pepper spray. If she already knew her husband was dangerous, she could have set up other precautions. She could have shot her husband with a pellet gun, a BB gun, an airsoft gun, anything that could get her husband distracted away from hurting her. Also, on their observation 3 was that owning a concealed weapon entitles less crime if you have a weapon to protect yourself. By having a weapon yourself, you're having a concealed weapon. So that makes it so where whoever you are protecting yourself from doesn't know you have a weapon. When you pull out your gun, you're going to shock them, and they're going to shoot wherever they pull out their gun first. They're going to shoot first. And this can, once again, put innocent people in danger. 1 second. They said that this decreases crime, like we pointed out in our observation, is that this adds to a dangerous amount of self-confidence. This causes people to think, I have a gun, I'm safe, I can protect you all. This is putting vigilante on the rise, and this puts people in danger. Innocent people like Trayvon Martin, who was just an innocent boy going to the grocery store, who just so happened to be black. On observation 4, that this, they pointed out that the police take 11 minutes of response time. Everyone knows that if you are in the center of the city, it takes less time. If you're at your own home, it does take more time because it has the police having to figure out your exact home so they don't break into the wrong home. They have to make sure that they have precautions of not to shoot the wrong people, to not shoot innocent people. We are putting our lives in professionals. 1 moment, I'll get to you in the end. When you're in it, by giving yourself more time, you're making sure that no innocents are shot on accident. This is why the response time takes long. If everybody pulls out their gun, you're in a Mexican standoff and no one wins. Like we said, this is an argument about whether people should hold concealed weapons. These are weapons that you're able to hide in your pocket in some form or manner of where your weapon cannot be shown. But this is not every weapon is considered a concealed weapon. Only pistols and other large guns, ones that can be lethal. Not all knives are considered a concealed weapon if you go over the 4-inch rule, I believe. And another thing is, with concealed weapons, our opponent said that the wife didn't have a concealed weapon. Not all women like guns. Not all women are strong enough to point a gun and shoot without hurting themselves. One moment. By people protecting themselves, they put others in danger. So go ahead with your arguments. You have questions?
I think I kind of forgot some of them, so that's okay.
All right. To go back on case, we're saying that vigilantism is going on the rise. People are mistaking themselves as a superhero, to mistake themselves as Batman. They are not as professionally trained like Batman. They are also not, like, Batman is recruited by the police officers. They go to Batman for help. No one is going to these individuals saying, hey, I want your help. No, because they know that those pretend vigilantes are going to actually help them without hurting other people. They do not have the same morals as Batman does. Batman is unbiased. As my opponent said, that people who get vigilantism, you can't judge if that person's going to have a bias against you. Once again, going back to George Zimmerman, who had a personal judgment against African Americans. Also, with accidental discharges, as my partner said, is also on the rise. I don't know how many times you've seen the news of some idiot who was out in the boondocks and accidentally shot him, his friend, or we can go back to one of the president's accidental discharge when they were hunting. These are people who are not professionally trained who are having access to these weapons. And our opponents also said that to go back on the off case, our opponent said that you have to have, to get a concealed weapon, you need a background check, gun training, and a psychological evaluation. For the psycho evaluation, I guarantee that if the people who have done school shootings, I bet who have their concealed weapons are able to get theirs, they probably went through a background check. Not everybody has a sketchy background. You can still be psychologically imbalanced and obtain a weapon, because how do you determine someone is unfit to own a gun? If you were to go to my background check, it's going to be spotless. But that doesn't mean I can't go on a killing spree, because I am plenty messed up in the head. All you guys watch it. They also say that you need a reason to get a gun. There is no... People say they go out for just shooting practice. Or they say that they go out just for the sport of owning a gun. For the concealed weapons, there's no reason for you to tell people that the only excuse you need is, like, I feel safer with a gun. So they don't have a valid argument that they need a reason to think their life is in danger to get a concealed weapon. I end here.
Okay, so Judge, may I call you by your real name if preferable?
No.
No, okay, I'll refer to you as Judge. Alright, so I'm just going to start on their case, and then I'm going to go off case in order, no tricks. Alright, everybody ready? Wait, should I wait for her? She's not even here.
I don't think so, because I'm just in the revolver, right? Yeah.
Alright. maybe she'll be able to help you out. But okay, she's missing out. All right, so starting off with their first observation and talking about starting off with their first observation talking about how the vigilante is on the rise, and that because vigilante is on the rise, we need to show how that concealed weapon permits do more harm. But I'm going to just turn this whole observation into a reason why concealed weapons could do more good. Because when we see that vigilante is on the rise, we see that there's people trying to commit their own actions with guns, but not all people that are vigilantes have concealed weapon permits. The example of George Zimmerman was just one example in which we asked them, what's the percentage of vigilantes that actually have legal concealed weapon permits, and they did not answer this. So we could just show that vigilantes are people that are committing illegal acts, so we're going to show that it's highly acceptable that they don't have concealed weapon permits. So when we see these people that have guns and are on the rise, we need to have innocent lives in the matter, which is why we value that concealed weapon permits do more harm than good, so that they'd be able to protect themselves against criminals. And so vigilante on the rise is a reason why you should value concealed weapon permits to protect the lives of innocents. So when they drop down to the impact saying that the vigilante is on the rise and this decreases the safety of people, that's not that's not completely true, because we see that if people can't protect themselves with their concealed weapon permits, that means that that's a problem for safety, and that's something that we truly value. So for their next observation of accidental discharge, they talk about all these accidental discharge, and their whole statistics were coming from police officers, and they're trying to make this case. Well, if police officers have this huge case of discharge, it must be higher with people that aren't police officers. But how I mentioned that police officers are more likely to commit a discharge because they use guns on a daily basis, multiple times a day. And so when they provide statistics only about police officer discharge and not about actual concealed weapon permit discharge, that's just really vague statistics and a really vague argument in their whole perception that they're trying to make. And so they also make this other argument saying that there's some idiots shooting somebody, but they don't provide any stories or statistics. But then they're calling these people that are committing discharge idiots. What does that have to say about our president and cops that are committing discharge? I think they're valuing that our cops and presidents are idiots, and that's something that we don't value, because sometimes accidents happen, but accidents don't result as in death. They didn't provide any stories about how concealed weapon permits committing a discharge lead to death. So you're going to see that there's no magnitude coming from this accidental discharge, so it's not something you're going to really want to focus on or vote on. As when I get to the off case, we're going to show you how that we have a huge magnitude of how concealed weapon permits stop deaths from happening. So now I'm going to go to the off case. So when we mentioned our off case, we talked about we gave you the background, how that people go through background checks and people have to have no felonies, no prior convictions, and they go through psychic evaluation and make sure that they have no prior history of mental illness. And their response to this was about school shootings and how that people get away with school shootings and they got passed through these background checks and etc. Levels of bureaucracy. But my response to that of their school shootings is that just because someone committed a school shooting does not mean they had a concealed weapon permit. Example, Sandy Hook shooting, the guy that committed that took the weapon from his mother. The weapon wasn't even his. The weapon was not under his name. He did not have a concealed weapon. He did not have a concealed weapon permit. So we see most of their examples they bring aren't of people actually having concealed weapon permits. It's just people having access to guns. So they're making guns are a bad argument, not concealed weapon permits are bad arguments. So we can still keep our backgrounds about the ways people have to go to get concealed weapon permits. And so when they make arguments saying like, well, you don't need a concealed weapon permit to defend yourself. You could use bats. You could use pepper spray. Well, I'm pretty sure someone that has a gun outweighs a lady having a concealed weapon permit. So we show you in just through life that if someone has a bat, they won't be able to successfully defend themselves when someone has plenty of range and has a gun in their hands. And when they make arguments saying that not all women are strong enough to pull a handgun, my first response to that, as me being a strong, firm believer of feminism, I believe that women do have the power and abilities to hold a handgun. And so I believe that women should actually be supported and value concealed weapon permits to show men that men aren't the only ones that can hold guns and use guns. So when we make arguments talking about how that criminals are bad, and criminals will always do bad things, and criminals will always have access to guns, no matter what. We talk about how that concealed weapon permits allow innocent people to protect themselves from criminals, and that's how our values increase the safety for the innocent lives. We provide you with warrants to this. Another warrant for this is in Portland, a man tried to go into a strip club, was not allowed to go into the strip club, and so because of this, he started to open fire on the bouncer and patrons waiting to get in the strip club. However, the second bouncer had a concealed weapon permit, so he was allowed to shoot at the victim and stop the shooting spree from only injuring 2 people instead of being a huge, massive shooting spree. And so we value that people like bouncers can have concealed weapon permits to protect innocent people, because that's one reason of showing good cause for people having a concealed weapon permit. Yes, question.
Would you not say that a bouncer would be considered a professional rather than having someone who is not a professional owning a gun?
I would say that if you don't value concealed weapon permits, then you're saying you don't value bouncers having concealed weapon permits. So we're just lumping them together. So you have to be completely against something. You have to be against bouncers having concealed weapon permits. We're for bouncers having concealed weapon permits, and that's just one example of that. Another example of someone that's not a professional or a bouncer, just a man attending church, had a concealed weapon permit. A guy opened fire in a church, and because of this, the guy that had a concealed weapon permit was able to stop him before the police were able to respond. And so when their responses to our contentions about less crime, even though we provide all these statistics and warrants, was just that, whoever pulls out first wins, and whoever pulls out first is not a reason to vote against our contentions, because we provide you with statistics and stories about it actually happening. So when we say that how concealed weapon permits equals safety for innocent against criminals, they completely drop this impact, and they only state that whoever can pull out faster is going to shoot the other person. That's bad, and that's not a direct response to our arguments. I mean, yeah. And so their response to our 11-minute response is that, well, it's going to be a lot faster when you're out in the public because they don't have to find out exactly where you live. I'm going to turn that and say that it's actually a lot harder to find, to respond to someone where you don't know their exact address. It's a lot faster to find someone's exact address as opposed to someone being in the back of an alley. In the back of an alley, I don't know exactly where I'm at. I don't know my address, but can you please find me? All right, so now we have to track you down. That's going to take a lot longer than, all right, we're going to come to 307 North Tustin Avenue, blah, 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 blah. So we see that police can't always respond fast enough to save people, and so we need people with concealed weapon permits to be able to defend themselves from criminals that will always have access to these weapons. And for these reasons, I urge a ballot for the negative, and plus I have 2 chains.
Oh, that last point, dude. I think that last point's gonna win this whole thing.
Yeah.
Should have brought 2 chains.
Oh yeah. Well, we could both say you have blood.
She's lacking blood, though. She just lost the blood.
You want a roadmap? Okay. I'm going to go off case and then voters. I think that when you look at our observation 3 of less crime, and on your, I don't know about your flow, but on mine, there is nothing to the right of that. They don't respond to our warrants about lower crime rates, about 41 states doing it, about the correlation between concealed carry permits and lowering crime. So I think that when we can have an impact of decreasing crime, especially by those numbers, like homicide by 52% in Illinois, I think that that's a huge impact that absolutely goes to the negative team. Next, I want to talk about our observation 4 of self-defense and how, like, basically here's their response. They say, yeah, it's 11 minutes, but that's to make sure that, like, no one shoots each other when they shouldn't, or that's to make sure that, like, everything is okay. Their response is basically like, yeah, someone comes into your house or they invade your personal space if you're out in public, they're going to be violent against you, and you're supposed to be like, hey, do you want to have some tea with your knife while we wait for the police to get here? We think that people should have the ability to defend themselves and not have to wait 11 minutes. Again, when they don't respond to that warrant, we think that you should be able to protect your own life and not have somebody else be able to take it from you. So now, let's get to voters. First, you're going to be voting for the negative team because of our warrants and examples that A, are completely relevant, where we talk about Kevin McLaughlin literally having a concealed carry permit and using that to save at least 10 people that goes unresponded to. And then Lasai brings up a couple more in his speech. All of their examples, none of them are about concealed carry permits. They're just about people using firearms, like George Zimmerman. He didn't have a concealed carry permit. He just used a firearm.
Hold on.
You could call a point of order.
Stop. Go ahead. It has to be a point. It has to be if he's making a new one. You can't. It's not about if he's talking about something that's never been talked about before. You can bring that up. So go ahead.
We had said George Zimmerman.
Yeah, you can't bring that up.
No, you gotta say that he's bringing up a new one because before he never stated that George Zimmerman did it.
Oh no, I don't think it counts. No, George Zimmerman itself is example. Sorry.
Yeah, George Zimmerman's on the flow. You have 2 minutes and 3 seconds remaining. Go ahead.
Okay. So again, Lasai tells you that like all that basically, I'll get to that in my voter. So that's our first voter, warrants and examples. Our next voter is that they want you to have tea with someone who is going to kill you. Basically, they say that 11 minutes is fine, even if it's a criminal who literally has violent intent on your life. They don't say anything on how something else solves. We think that this is serious and that valuing concealed carry permits is the way to value people protecting themselves. Our third voter is, again, the non-uniqueness of their entire case. They're just talking about guns in general. So, and if you want to, like, extend, like, okay, if you vote for their advocacy, that basically means that you would rather have all the people that they talk about gun harms, you would rather have them be regular gun owners that don't have the same stringent requirements and psychological evaluation as you do to have to get a concealed carry. So we, like, reduce all those harms, and they're saying that, like, no, it would basically be better, because concealed carry permits are bad, it would basically be better if these people were just normal gun owners. But if you're not going to vote for us on the non-uniqueness of their case, then you're going to vote for us on the fact that their accidental discharge observation has no impact, or rather no magnitude, like Lasai brings up, when they have no casualties in their warrant. And they talk about police officers, and one of them shot his finger. He didn't shoot him in the chest, didn't shoot him in the leg. He shot his finger, which generally is something that needs stitches. So, like, yeah, if you think, like, you know, getting stitches is really bad, maybe vote for them. But we think that it's more important to protect someone's life. Our fifth voter is, and this is why you're voting for us today, Judge. We stop deaths and decrease crime, and they have no responses to our warrants for that. But secondly, and most importantly, maybe, is that our advocacy empowers women when they make the case that women can't hold guns. We say that women should be able to do anything that men can do, and you're going to be voting for government today. Or negative team today.
Women empowerment. It's what us two men strongly believe.
You guys didn't even listen to what I said. You just said feminism. And that...
Well, Lasai made responses. I have like 10 responses on here, but that didn't. But.
Okay. I just need to find my original. Alright. How much time do I get? 5 minutes.
It's on
And
board.
is that for response and voters?
Yes.
Yeah, everything.
Alright, so
Anything you need to respond to in your voters.
response is okay. Let me start it. Okay. Thank you all for gathering here today. I'd like once again to thank my opposition for a wonderful argument. I only have 5 minutes, so I'm gonna get right down to it. I'm gonna go I believe off case and then on. Actually no, on case and then off. So I'm so sorry. Off case and then on. Yeah. Okay. They had mentioned that it does take vigorous psychological examinations. I'd like to point out that racist people can pass psychological evaluations, as we had mentioned earlier. Racists do have concealed permit. continuing on that front, you mentioned, you said that George Zimmerman did not have a concealed carry. I'd like to reiterate, we did say that multiple times. He did have a concealed carry permit, so that is invalid. You had mentioned that we are anti-feminists. Now, as much as I could see how our statement could be misinterpreted, I'd like to once again point out that we were mentioning preferences. Women have a preference some women have a preference for non-firearms, and as much as we could turn this into a feminist debate, discuss social norms and pressures by the media to conform to a specific docile or submissive look, that's not what we're going to discuss about. I'm talking about the typical mindset of women within this society, especially considering firearms. That is not a restrictive statement. I'm not using it in a discriminatory manner on that front, so therefore that can be disregarded. That voter can just be disregarded. Now, as for, we are not suggesting you have tea with your murderer, as much as I would say Uncle Iroh approach from Avatar, cartoon. As much as that would be an interesting experience, we're not suggesting that. We're merely suggesting other forms of protection beyond the one that would be needed through a concealed carry permit. For example, you had mentioned things happening in people's homes. Well, you don't carry a gun in your home, especially when you have children. So the concealed carry permit would not be an especially strong or even weighted argument whatsoever once you are in your house. Those that are locked up, typically with a gun, away from the ammo entirely. In fact, the woman you had mentioned, by the time, even if she did have a concealed carry permit, by the time she managed to run to the safe where gun owners typically store their guns, run back to the place where they store their ammo, then put it together, those shots would still be already fired through her body. Now, continuing, for the accidental discharge, I believe this would be considered on case. There is casualties. I have mentioned it indeed in response to Lasai's question, I believe, when he had asked about it, or sometime a bit before that. There are casualties, and it was not only stitches. He shot his finger off. He didn't shoot his finger, it shot off. Now, unless stitches have the magical property to renew an entire limb, I don't believe that would require stitches. And ultimately, we brought up cops, and it still has magnitude, very much magnitude with this, because a lot of your argument is based on the idea that the people who get concealed weapons permits are professionals. They are seriously trained. So we brought up an example of people who are professionals, who are seriously trained, and therefore would be the archetype of people who would have concealed carry permits, and showed that even these people, they have their accidents, which could result in something as serious as a lost finger or a lost life, which, as I stated, was mentioned. So if I were to just go over voters, since I believe I got everything, you should vote for government for many reasons. Firstly, because we have valid examples as well, and while many of them are still based in theory or simple psychology on the front of empowering women, we have that also continuing. Ultimately, our side does go for safety. Our side weighs more heavily on safety, as you can see this through many of our impacts, impacts. Now, you should also vote for us because our accidental discharge definitely does link. It shows that gun permits do more harm than good, absolutely. So therefore, many of our observations, all of our observations, uphold the resolution in a solid manner. And that is that they do more harm than good. There's less safety when that is involved. Thank you.
So cool.
I should have